Hello and welcome to this special broadcast on Swabhiman Bharat. When we talk about a self-reliant India, we often think of hard power, things like defense budget, exports, manufacturing, global trade share and so on and so forth. But there is also something called soft power, and in that department, India has done rather well in the last many decades, exporting things like Bollywood films, yoga, Indian cuisine, you name it. All of these have created a space, a talking point in the average Westerner's mind about India. What may we be able to do more in spreading Indian soft power, which will complement and has to necessarily complement Indian hard power? What can India do to enhance its soft power and its standing around the world in the Prime Minister's vision of making India an Atmanirbhar and a Swabhiman Bharat? So, joining us on this special broadcast are three very, very special guests. I'll be joined by renowned Indian author Amish Tripathi, Member of Parliament from the Congress Party, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and Indian badminton team coach Pullela Gopichand. First, it's Amish Tripathi. Thank you very much, Amish, for speaking with us on this special broadcast. When we speak about India's soft power and what is it that India can sell to the world in terms of ideas, somehow Indian soft power in the eyes of the average Westerner is restricted to Bollywood movies. Why is it that we've not been able to sell our way of life, our philosophies, our religions, our ethics, just the Indian way of thinking as much?
Very good question, Zaka, but I'll handle this from two perspectives. One, there are cases where countries have had hard power but not soft power.
Yes.
Nations have had that before. So the Mongols, for example, had tremendous hard power, very little soft power, even when they were at their peak of their power. But America has both hard power and soft power. But you find very few examples of the reverse. A country which is low on hard power but has high soft power. That doesn't really happen normally.
Okay.
Right? So hard power is kind of like a necessary but not sufficient condition for soft power. So I think the first problem is honestly India did not have enough hard power for a long time. It's only post 1991, let's be honest, when we gave up our frankly almost suicidal economic policies and liberalized and gave up the ghost of socialism. That so many of us were, you and I, Zaka, in our families have been pulled out of out of poverty but there are still many left behind. So that's the first step. As we become stronger economically, you will find that our soft power will also expand or could expand. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect, I think many parts of our culture, and I'm living in London now, have actually become popular already. It's just that often the ownership has been confused.
Missing.
So yoga, for example, became hugely popular. But let's be honest, being brutally honest, we cannot give ourselves, us Indians, the credit for building it up. It was built up more by the flower power generation in the US in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
But at least fortunately, over the last few years, we've at least reclaimed ownership for yoga. There was a very real danger in the West of, yoga being dissociated from India. I know it sounds bizarre now, but there was a very real danger, right?
Yeah.
But so that was built up by itself. I think there are so many examples of our present way of life and our ancient way of life, which could be used to build up, but we don't build up. We don't work on it. A lack of hard power, which will get addressed over time.
Yeah.
But we have to be conscious of building our soft power as well. We're not conscious enough, frankly, at this stage. We're slowly getting there, but it'll take time.
Now, one of the things that's being popularized, particularly in the last few years and since this government came to power under Prime Minister Modi, is these religious circuits or corridors, whether it is for the Buddhist circuit via Lumbini and so on, or whether it is the Ramayan circuit via Ayodhya. All of these sort of pilgrimage routes, as it were, how does that help popularize the idea of India being a confluence of cultures, a confluence of religions, and how may this popularize the idea of India in the West in a way that we can attract more tourists and more, admirers and people who want to come to India for this confluence of cultures?
No, the thing is, the facts are there. We just need to build up the narrative. So often we Indians forget the true scale of our country. We have more people in India than all of North America, all of Europe, all of Middle East combined.
Yes.
We have more languages than all these regions combined. We have more cuisines than all these regions combined. In the Western world, Indian cuisine is thought to be a particular part of Punjabi cuisine and some Lucknowi cuisine. That's it. That
True.
they think is Indian cuisine, right?
True.
I mean, we know it's much big. I love Lucknowi and Punjabi cuisine, but they don't even cover all of Punjabi cuisine. Forget about all of Indian cuisine. So you said so rightly on our religious circuits. There are so many there at least 35, depending on how you count it, 35 to 40 Buddhist countries. And Gautam Buddha was from the Indian subcontinent.
Yes.
We can build that, to get to build stronger relations with the Buddhist countries. Of course, there are many Hindus around the world as well.
Yeah.
Yoga, Ayurveda, our music, the fact that it's India is one of those few lands where practically every religious group lives together in relative harmony. It's perhaps the only country in the world where a significant number of Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims actually live in peace.
True.
We Indians are so used to it, we don't realize how
Take it
out
for
of the
granted,
ordinary
yeah.
it is. In most other countries in the world, Shias and Sunnis, the fights that happen, we can speak of this. There are so many things we can speak of. The facts are there. We need to start building the narrative. It will build over time.
There is always this comparison, and whether we like it or not, this is going to be par for course for the next few decades, the India-China comparison. Clearly, China has a lot of hard power, whether it's military muscle, whether it is economic muscle. One of the things that they've found difficult is to propagate the idea of soft power. They have tried a few things like Confucius Institutes and promoting medieval Chinese culture and so on. It hasn't really caught on in the eyes of the Western world. India, though, has this natural drawing ability, whether it's our culture, whether it's our food, whether it's our religions, whether it's our philosophies, our way of thinking. How can India play that to further its advantage when it comes to this soft power differential with China?
I must say that actually traditional Chinese culture is actually quite attractive. I'm not so sure if the present, I'm a diplomat, so I have to be a little careful. But I'm not so sure the present regime represents the traditional Chinese culture, to be honest, my personal view.
Sure.
Right? And of course, what COVID has done to the entire world certainly affects that. India, on the other hand, if you see, there are a few global soft power reports that come out. There was one that I'd been invited to speak at. It was pre-COVID times, in London. And India was actually shockingly ranked 27th out there, right? I was the only Indian, not just on stage, even in the audience, right?
Wow.
Forget about on stage, even in the audience, there weren't that many Indians interested in it. This was a conference where Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, had come to speak.
Yes.
So it was a high-profile, good event. But what that actually showed to me that our real problem is not so much a positive or a negative image. Our real problem is actually we have no image. Among the masses, we are not as top of mind as the second most populous country, as the fifth largest economy in the world should be, right?
Yes.
That to me is the key problem. Having said that, when I spoke to the people who put the report together, they said that I know you guys might think 27 is very low, but actually it's a vast improvement to what it was, a few years ago. So the movement is in the right direction, but we have a long way to go. And look, soft power is not built in, a few years. It's a generation or two, and we have to be conscious of it. And one of the key things I realize, I believe, what is soft power? It's essentially branding, right?
Yeah.
if you make the brand too different from the product, right, it doesn't work. Right, the brand has to be true to the product. So if we Indians are going to go around the world saying, "Oh, we are this fantastically disciplined, compliant guys," that's not going to work. Right? I mean, we are not.
Yeah.
Okay, we are the most rebellious people around. We are one of the most difficult people to manage. Right?
Yeah.
But if we get the point of, if our brand shows that we are rebellious, yes, but we are also passionate and freedom loving and cool, then it fits the product. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what we have to do is when we have plans for ourselves, for our brand, it should be true to our realities. Too many people in India, and I find that a little bizarre at times, want us to be like China.
True.
We cannot be like China.
True.
We are not like them. We're a bit more like how the US was, in its phase when it was growing fast.
Yeah.
Rebellious, chaotic, apparently on the surface, but also very passionate, very creative. So we have to see that as a model rather than China. We're not that kind of compliant country which will quietly just follow rules. We know we are not. I mean, you start laughing the moment I said, that if someone said India is this disciplined, compliant country which will always follow the rules, we Indians know that's not going to happen, boss.
True.
All right, Dr. Tharoor now joins me, a member of parliament from the Congress party and somebody who's been a diplomat for a large part of his career. Dr. Tharoor, talking about soft power, why is it that even after 30 years since liberalization, in the eyes of the common Westerner, whether it's American or British or Western European, the idea of India's soft power is somehow just restricted to Bollywood movies? We have not been able to popularize anything else. Why is that the case?
Well, I think part of the problem has been, first of all, that we came to it a bit late. I remember with some immodest seconds, I was probably the first person to speak about it in relation to India. The man who came up with the entire concept of soft power, Harvard professor Joseph Nye, happened to be a friend of mine. And he was the one who, in the early 90s, for the first time, devised this notion that power doesn't just have to be hard power of either military muscle that is using sticks or economic power that is using payments, but rather can be about attraction, your cultural assets, your values, your foreign policies, and so on. But the purpose of soft power should be both as an alternative to hard power and as a complement to it. Now, that idea was very much devised by Nye in the context of the US. But I thought with his permission that I could apply it to India, and I did. And from around the turn of the century, I started talking about it. And I'm very pleased that I was invited in 2006 or 7 by RNAW in this country to deliver the first RNAW lecture. And I chose that topic and they welcomed it. And this became, therefore, something that entered the discourse. The foreign secretary and others were in the audience. And now it's being very routinely talked about that this is our biggest asset. At that point, it was a hard sell. I remember trying to talk, for example, to the assembled ambassadors at the Ministry of External Affairs for the annual conference. And there was a lot of skepticism. They said, no, traditional foreign policy is really serious stuff. All this business about Bollywood and yoga and Ayurveda and Indian cuisine, this is all fluff. It doesn't really matter. In other words, soft power says, we're not going to rely in persuading you only through coercive hard power, military force, or through buying you off with foreign aid or whatever. We're going to be so nice, you're going to want to be with us. I mean, remember the joke about how all these protesters outside American embassies in the Middle East were shouting, Yankee, go home, and whispering below that, and take me with you. Because they really wanted to be part of that. So that's the whole soft power concept. And in the case of India, I would say that it was our big strength that we had all the soft power at a time when our foreign policy alone or our economic might alone wasn't enough to impress itself upon the world's consciousness. And Nye in his books pointed out that today being the information age, three types of countries are likely to gain soft power and therefore succeed in the world. One, he said, are those whose dominant cultures and ideals are closer to prevailing global norms. And he defined those norms as liberalism, pluralism, and so on, which obviously reflected in India. Democracy was India's big asset. Second, those with most access to multiple channels of communication, and therefore having some more influence over how issues are framed. So those who actually, for example, were dominating international television networks, satellite TV, and all of that, and news agencies, obviously their stories got told more than ours. And then those whose credibility is enhanced by their domestic and international performance. So that was the message that I gave. And I thought we could actually, in this age where it's no longer the country with the bigger army that wins, we can be the country with the better story. And the better story is what wins. And I must say that, in many ways, that was the strength of it. Just to conclude, since you asked why we haven't done, I think the counter answer is we haven't leveraged it consciously enough. Because when you have a festival of India, you're doing something very self-conscious that to people looks like propaganda. And propaganda is recognized by people around the world for what it is.
Yeah.
Soft power is as much something that comes across by accident or without government action as what comes across as a result of deliberate government action. So, for example, the Voice of America or the Fulbright scholarships are deliberate American government action for soft power.
Yes.
But if you enjoy a Coke or want an American pizza or a McDonald's hamburger or whatever, that's got nothing to do with the government, but you're doing something that's part of your affinity for an American lifestyle.
Right.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
So when somebody does yoga and they know it's come from India, that helps India. But when somebody goes to an international festival of India sponsored by the government of India, that's a government exercise and they see it as that. That's one of the differences.
In 2020, in the context of the virus, COVID-19, and the Chinese stock, as it were, has fallen in global capitals around the world. What can India do to capitalize on that? Because this contestation between India and China, as I said a moment ago to Amish, this contestation between India and China is going to be there for the next few decades.
You're right, Zaka, but at the same time, soft power alone will not win that rivalry.
Yes.
Let me stress with it that the fact is that soft power without hard power is an admission of weakness. Hard power without soft power is bullying, and that's what the Chinese have been doing more and more, and it's arguably more unpopular. But if you have soft power and you don't have hard power, if you don't have the ability to have credible military strength at the border to deter attack, if you don't show that you have the political will to resist encroachments on your territory, that is simply going to be seen as weakness, both by the Chinese and by the rest of the world watching you. So I would argue you need both soft power and hard power. At the same time, I'm conceding that the world of the 21st century will increasingly be a world in which the use of hard power carries with it the odium of mass global public disapproval, whereas a blossoming of soft power will lend itself more easily to the information era and will be a great asset for us here. So we need both. Now, obviously, we've tried some of this even in China. I mean, the fact that some Bollywood movies were big hits in China added to our soft power in China at a time when most Chinese were indifferent to us as a country. They were focused only on Western countries or on Southeast Asian neighbors. Even Chinese tourism, which took off in a big way before the COVID pandemic, and there were millions of Chinese tourists on the loose around the world, we got hardly any of them. I think we got fewer Chinese tourists coming into India than we got Indian students going to study in China. So it really was an embarrassingly low number. But things like, if they watch Dangal and they watch Three Idiots, and on the basis of that, they're curious about India, that's a way in which soft power enhances Chinese tourism here, etc. Of course, we're now far away from tourism thanks to what happened in Ladakh and the death of 20 soldiers. But my point is that soft power is not about conquering others. It's about being yourself. And being yourself has to be attractive in its own self. Now, that means that we are going to be judged by the Chinese and by the rest of the world, both on hard power, that is our military credibility, our economic growth, our economic and military muscle, but also on our soft power elements that we project onto the global consciousness, which we can sometimes do deliberately, like through the export of cultural products. I mentioned, you mentioned Bollywood, the festivals of India abroad, and so on, the cultivation of foreign publics, but also what we project unwittingly through the ways in which we are perceived as a result of news stories about our country in the global mass media.
Talking about soft power and the so-called Indian way of life, there used to be a time in the 60s, whether it was because of the Beatles, whether it was because of yoga, whether it was the ISKCON, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna cult. The average Westerner perceived India to be the antithesis of pursuing materialism, pursuing worldly wealth, so on and so forth. Why has India not been able to plant that idea as a more successful one, the kind that we saw, very popularly back in the 60s and 70s?
If you say, why haven't we done more than that? We have, in the sense that, for example, our TV soap operas were a major asset. For example, the number one soap opera for years in Afghanistan during the war with the Taliban was Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi. And it was the number one show because suddenly Afghans found a show through which family problems that in their society were traditionally literally hidden behind the veil could now be discussed openly. And it became such a major show that mullahs started objecting because they said that it's even generating absences from religious functions and so on. And finally, the show was shut down on those grounds. But in the meanwhile, it had captured the public imagination of Afghanistan. You talk to Afghans even today of a certain age, and they will remember that as an example of why they love India. I remember when I first went to study abroad and I met Pakistani students for the first time, they were all raving about the Bollywood movies they were watching smuggled, because in those days it was after the 71 war. There was no official export of Indian films. So all of these things are very important for us to celebrate. Let it happen organically. I don't think the government needs to get involved in this. We shouldn't be aggressive about it. What we can do, we have done. For example, one of the few things that I've applauded in the Modi government as an opposition MP was their success in getting the UN to declare an International Day of Yoga. So one day every year, people are doing something very Indian, and India is getting free publicity around the world as a result. That's something worth applauding. When I went to the country of Colombia, the President Uribe said to me, listen, can you get some Ayurveds to come to our country? I've been hearing wonderful things about the science of wellness that you have. There's an asset for us, right? And there the government can quietly help. The government shouldn't send an Ayurvedic mission. What it should do is talk to leading Ayurvedic establishments and say, listen, Colombia wants you, go. That kind of thing is also soft power. And I think we need to now have a little more of a symbiotic partnership between the government and civil society, ordinary people, NGOs, private entrepreneurs, creative people, and get them to send their products and their messages out. I think that this is not about propaganda. I would argue it will not work if it's directed from above, but it can be encouraged from above. And that's where the government, I think, has not done enough to leverage the asset of soft power to get this quality out into the public space. Mahatma Gandhi won India its independence through using soft power before the term had even been coined, because non-violence and satyagraha are classic use of soft power. And you don't want to undermine that by having people attacking Gandhi and praising Godse in your country. That's what the world will see. You don't want to have a country that used to celebrate its welcoming of Christians and Jews from the time of Christ, from Islam from the time of the Prophet. A country like that now suddenly being seen as regressive, bigoted, communal-minded, that's not going to help your soft power. I remember the British historian E.P. Thompson saying, India is perhaps the most important country for the future of the world because all the convergent influences of the world run through this society. There is not a thought that is being taught in the West or the East, he said, that is not active in some Indian mind. Let's show the Indian mind at its most active, arguing, discussing, deliberating with different thoughts, different disagreements. We will have enhanced soft power around the world.
All right, when we talk about soft power, there is also sport. We know how popular cricket is around the world, but then cricket is played by only a handful of countries around the world. Let me now go across to Pullela Gopichand, who's the coach of the Indian badminton team, also a very successful player in his own right back in the day. Thanks very much, Gopi, for speaking with us. We always have this comparison of cricket versus other sports, right? Somehow this dichotomy where cricket is so hugely popular here in this country, and yet when you talk about exporting soft power, when you talk about popularizing Indian sports around the world, cricket has a very limited appeal. It's still, even today, played only by very few countries, largely what used to be British colonies. Whereas a sport like badminton is played by so many countries around the world, here in Asia and in Europe. Around the world, we have players who come from all kinds of countries, and yet somehow we have not been able to popularize the idea of India being a badminton powerhouse. Yes, recently, after you came to the fore back in the 90s, and then we've had the women players in Saina and PV Sindhu and so on. But somehow we're not seen as a badminton powerhouse like a China is, or even now, you know, the Danes are. There are badminton powerhouses. We are not somehow seen in that same league. Why is that?
I think we in the last 10 years have done very well in the sport. In fact, from where we started off to where we are now, I think there's been a significant progress. And whether it's medals at the Asian, Commonwealth, World Championship, or Olympics, many of these have been after many, many years or for the first time ever. So I'm very happy with the progress. And I hope that in the years to come, we'll have many more coming our way from our country.
And in this sort of battle between cricket and other sports, or cricket versus non-cricket sports, how much are the other sports getting suffered because of that? Because clearly, you know, if you're a kid who is, you know, growing up in Chennai or Hyderabad or Bangalore or Delhi, wherever, or even any of the tens of small towns in this country, they all want to be like Virat Kohli, or they want to be like Tendulkar, or the big cricketer. It's only now that, you know, girls are coming out and saying they want to be like Sindhu, or they want to be like Saina. And, you know, after Sania Mirza burst onto the scene, they're coming out and saying they want to be like Sania. How much more needs to be done to popularize the idea of non-cricket sports amongst our own young people?
Well, as far as sport in general is concerned, in the last few years, there's definitely been a push from the government, from corporates, and from the citizens equally to ensure that there is a need. Everybody understands today the need for sport. And it's great to see that that support is culminating into more people take up sport, Halo India, Fit India, whether it's Yoga Day, or various other sports doing well at the Olympic level for the first time, whether it's shooting, wrestling, boxing, badminton. I think we have many sports doing well. And I do believe that as a nation, we have started to become a more overall sporting nation rather than a cricket only nation. Of course, the difference between cricket and the other sport is a lot, but still, I would say other sports have been, we've got some good champions from other sports as well.
All right, so on that note, I want to thank all three of our special guests for joining us on this special broadcast on Swabhiman Bharat, Amish Tripathi, Shashi Tharoor, and of course, Pullela Gopichand. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you at home had been tuned in to this special broadcast, thank you for your time. We'll catch you again next time.
Presented by ITC Sab Saath Bade.